Stress is a very physiological thing. We have what we call the stress hormone, that is cortisol, and that is made as a result of when things get kind of stressful. Our body, cortisol really makes us respond to stress and helps keep us active and energized and awake during stressful times over a long period of time. So when you were in school, you might have recognized stress through cortisol, and that was what motivated you to get through your exams, to seem like you were perform at higher levels for a short period of time until you had that exam, and that's when the cortisol then goes down. So it is increased when there is like an anticipatory stress, where there's lots of worry and lots of lots of future things that are going on in the brain. And the brain regulates this, and it tells the adrenal glands to promote the cortisol. So when cortisol is high, we get a lot of other side effects of that when it's not turned off. So in the short term, cortisol is good. It gives us more energy. It allows us to, really increases performance. But when it stays up for long periods of time, and this is what we're starting to see nowadays, more so than ever before in human history, is that cortisol tends to remain high for long periods of time. And that could lead to what we call the blood sugar roller coaster ride, lots of ups and downs in your blood sugar. It may make your diabetes or prediabetes blood sugar go up, go higher. It may cause increase in weight, and it also can depress the immune system. So these are all the other main hormone glands in our body, and these are the ones that all communicate. So we always say when one of these is thrown off, say under stress, the adrenal gland, which is producing the cortisol, when that is thrown off, all the other systems also tend to be thrown off too, because there's a communication. So typically this is the pituitary gland, this is the brain, and this is where this hormone is being produced, and it's saying, okay, wake up thyroid, you need to produce something. And the thyroid produces thyroid hormone. The pituitary gland is awake with stress, and it tells the adrenal glands to produce cortisol, for example, right? And there's feedback loops. So the reason why all these are thrown off at the same time is that there's a feedback loop telling the pituitary that, okay, there's enough, we need more cortisol, we're not responding, and there's this cyclic change that happens here, and it also will throw off other systems of the hormone system as well, other organs. So we get thyroid dysfunction, we can get influence of the thymus, which is our immune system, we get blood sugar problems, and we can get problems with our hormones as well, and in males, problems with testosterone production, which is very important for heart health and for energy and moods as well. So this is what shows, that stress is a very physiological process, and we can measure that with a saliva test, and it's going to naturally be high throughout the day, and it's going to dip down at night. So we could see a couple of classic patterns when the cortisol is out of control. And we could see people having difficulty sleeping, for example, not being able to fall asleep, or that's when cortisol is abnormally high at nighttime, for example. Or we could see people waking up very early. Again, their cortisol shoots up in the morning. There might be some sort of anticipatory stressor that they're having to face, and then it wakes them up much earlier. So this cortisol is also released, cyclical, and is very important for the sleep-wake cycle. It must be low to sleep, and it must be high to be stimulated and awake. And when we're under stress, it is going to be extra high to a certain point. help you respond to that stress. So the big point that I'm trying to make is cortisol is a steroid, and we all know that we could take steroids, corticosteroids. There's a pharmaceutical that was made basically is the same thing as cortisol. It's called corticosteroids or prednisone, and we use that for inflammatory conditions. We use it to depress the immune system. If we have a rash, we may put it on the rash to depress the immune system in that local area. If we have asthma, we may inhale a corticosteroid in order to repress that immune response in the lungs. So when you're producing a lot of cortisol, you're going to be directly dropping your immune system. And when people are under chronic stress, I do see it quite often, chronically low white blood cell count. And so that kind of sometimes triggers me to think that this person may be under stress and producing a lot of cortisol when there's other signs and symptoms and no other major problems going on. And it's just, and that's the immune system kind of being down-regulated. Again, the rationale for this is that in the short period of time, you don't really want to show the symptoms of a cold or a flu because you first have to get out of the stressful situation. Once you're out of the stressful situation, you then can start to experience the symptoms of a cold and flu, and you can rest. So that's the physiological and why cortisol lowers the immune system, is that, again, we want to stay awake and alert to get through a stressful event. Again, that's only good for a couple of weeks. And after that, if it's chronically depressed, our immune system is chronically depressed, and we're going to be at more risk of viral, bacterial, and all sorts of different kind of infections. We also see classically with cortisol is that when it is out of balance, we classically see a chronically lower immune system, and we also see when people do get a cold, for example, they have a hard time recovering from that cold. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And that's when cortisol has kind of burnt itself out, and now the body is no longer able to really fight that cold. And so they tend to have their cold for longer periods of time when there is this cortisol dysfunction going on. Because again, the cortisol reduces the immune system, so it's harder to get over the cold as well. So that's kind of a classic thing we see, and we see this a lot with when there is like a cold and someone has what we call a post-viral cough or post-viral symptoms, and they may have that for a few weeks to maybe even a month. When I see that on naturopathic side of it, I tend to think that their stress hormone has been out of balance for a long period of time, and we need to build that to help build their body up again, to really help them recover faster. So that brings us to the adrenal gland. Again, cortisol is made by the adrenal gland, and we call this system the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. That's probably the more medical term for the word adrenal support. But when we are under stress, we need lots of adrenal support. And you know, some of the basic things to kind of start with are exercise. So exercise, for example, short periods of more intense exercise are going to be better for the adrenal system, for this cortisol system, whereas high levels of activity for long periods of time, like a marathon run or long jogs, that actually may be detrimental to this system, to this adrenal stress system, because it is kind of stressful to do those long activities. So we're finding that shorter activities, but working out large muscles is really going to benefit the adrenals nicely, and not going to lead to that overproduction of cortisol because of the stress that's placed on the system. So there's some adrenal support that is going on in terms of the diet. So there's lots of things you can do with your diet. One thing is to balance the blood sugar, because we've all heard of that thing when someone says they're angry right before they eat. Well, that's a sign that maybe there's an adrenal system that's out of balance, and that you can no longer kind of maintain proper blood sugar levels. So what we want to do is have regular meals to maintain that blood sugar level, and that helps with maintaining the cortisol. Now, they also named cortisol glucocorticoid because it regulates glucose levels, and that's sugar in our blood. So there's that other side of cortisol. It increases inflammation, decreases the immune response, but it also increases our blood sugar. And that is detrimental for someone who has blood sugar problems. So supporting the hypothalamus pituitary axis and adrenal glands are really important for people that have prediabetes or are at risk for that. And we can actually see the blood sugar get balanced as this is balanced as well. All right, so we're going to talk a little more about stress support in terms of nutrition and herbs, and that's pretty much where we're going to end it today. So there's definitely a lot of ways we can be supporting our nervous systems right now, and we are entering into, we've been in this time the last 10 years, so we call this polysystemic functional health problems, in which there's a lot of different things feeding back onto our body and our nervous system and throwing our body out of balance. So that's what we call the polysystemic effects, meaning there is sleep problem. Many of us will have problems with sleep. Many of us will have problems with micronutrient deficiencies. We'll also be exposed to more radiation that we've had in the past. So there's lots of different things that are placing extra demands. And again, the modern lifestyle is overall stimulating and a little bit more stressful. So it's hard to counter that. So we have to often, and most of us, mostly everybody, needs to think about ways to modulate that. And again, we talked about exercise, breathing. Those should be the foundation because they're ultimately free and they really are profound. But these are some extra supportive herbs that are also quite profound and have many different actions. So things like ashwagandha, that's a wonderful herb, rhodiola, L-theanine, and other amino acids like GABA and lemon balm. And there's many different ones. When we're under lots of stress, the B vitamins are also used up quite a bit, and especially a B vitamin called B5 that tends to be used up quite a bit under stressful situations as well. So these are areas that could be focused on to support the stress systems as well. Now, the other one is, so we're going to go through them. Ashwagandha is one of my favorite herbs. And you can get all these herbs in tea forms, or they can be in tincture forms, or they can be in capsule forms. So we always pair them to fit the needs of the individual, and that whatever method works best for that person. Now, ashwagandha is what we call in herbal medicine an adaptogen. And adaptogens help us adapt to situations. It's very interesting. For the longest time, we didn't know what an adaptogen was. It's just these folk herbalists and naturopaths and natural medicine providers. We just said it just helps you adapt to stressors a little bit better. We didn't know. Until recently, we then learned that through some research that these herbs were actually upregulating a system that was actually involved with repairing the body after stress. And we learned that through the research on heat shock proteins. These are proteins that that are produced when the body is under stress. So I believe they were named after the body, after the research came out from people that had burns, for example, and the heat generated this massive stress response, because that's very stressful experience, and produces these heat shock proteins, which are produced to help the body recover from the stress. help the body balance, get itself back in order again. So that's the underlying mechanism now that we now know. So that's I find that quite fascinating. But these adaptogens, there's many different herbs out there that have that adaptogenic effects. But as you work with them over the years, and as I've worked with them over the years, I've kind of come to these different, I put little names to them so that I understand them in a way that we can give them to the right person at the right time, for example. So ashwagandha, I call the calming adaptogen. It also balances hormones and especially beneficial for testosterone. Females, it balances the cortisol, right? And as a result, it balances the estrogens and progesterone. It is also reduces anxiety and is also, because it's a calming adaptogen, it won't prevent you from sleeping and actually kind of calm you and actually may improve sleep. Then we have one called rhodiola, and rhodiola is a herb that I like to call a stimulating adaptogen, meaning that it is energy producing and helps to stimulate. So it's really good for attention, improvements in energy. So we call that a morning adaptogen. So one to take more in the morning time. The next one I really love, and probably my favorite and most utilized medicine, and actually it was one of the very first medicines, naturopathic medicines that I tried and had such a great result with over the years as well, is L-theanine, and we call that the chill out amino acid, or at least I call it the chill out amino acid, and it comes from green tea. So when you have coffee, you get the stimulating effects of the caffeine, but when you have tea, you don't get the same stimulating effects. That's because the L-theanine is there and present in the coffee, in the green tea, and it helps counteract that caffeine effect. So you get kind of a calming energy from green tea, whereas you get kind of more like overstimulated from coffee. So L-theanine is great. It's very calming, and it changes the brain waves to what we call more of an alpha wave in the brain, and that is the alpha wave. Alpha wave is produced in the brain when we're in a very calm state. So it'll be produced during meditation, and it'll be produced during right before sleep as well. So L-theanine is wonderful, and it can be taken throughout the day. And so when someone's overstressed, it's kind of going to bring their stress systems down to the normal level as well. Magnesium. So magnesium is another one that needs to be focused on because it is used up under stress. So symptoms of deficiency, feeling on the edge, muscle pain, blood pressure, these are all symptoms. Craving chocolate or craving coffee is another symptom of magnesium deficiency. It's very effective for calming when taken at night, for example, and may help improve sleep for some people, especially if they have a magnesium deficiency, and very well researched for anxiety as well, as being kind of a foundational nutritional component that can help support anxiety. So those are my main kind of go-to things when it comes to stress. And the emphasis that I want to put on here is really when you support your physiology, that's your body, amazing things can happen to your brain and your mind. And there's so many different practices and things we can do to help support our brain when we are under stress. And those are in addition to good support systems with counseling and talking things out, working on the mental component. But there's also that physiological component, and that's where I think there's sometimes less of an emphasis on, but really can be beneficial